What would you do if one morning you logged into your bank account and discovered your life savings, the money you'd built penny by penny over decades, was gone? No break-in, no scam from a stranger overseas. It was taken by the very people you raised, the children you trusted most. This is Margaret Hayes' story, a retired teacher who gave everything for her family, only to discover her greatest betrayal didn't come from outsiders, but from within her own home. Margaret Hayes settled into her armchair by the living room window, a cup of chamomile tea steaming on the table beside her laptop. It was a quiet Tuesday morning. The autumn leaves had turned the street into a carpet of amber and red, and for a moment, life felt steady, comfortable. She opened her online banking, as she always did at the start of each month, a small ritual, just to make sure her pension deposits had cleared, her bills had processed, and her savings sat safe and untouched. The nest egg she and her late husband, Robert, had built through years of sacrifice. But today, something was wrong. Her checking account looked fine. Her pension had arrived. The bills had gone through. But when she clicked into her savings, her heart dropped. The balance, the number that had once reassured her, steadied her, promised security, was nearly empty. Tens of thousands of dollars were gone. Her hand trembled on the mouse. She refreshed the page, convinced it had to be a mistake, but the number didn't change. She scrolled through the transaction history, eyes darting, breath quickening. There it was, a large transfer, outbound, marked with her son David's name. Her pulse pounded in her ears. David? She grabbed her phone and dialed his number with shaking fingers. He answered cheerfully. "Hey, Mom, everything okay?" "No, David," she snapped, the fear breaking through. "My savings, it's gone. I just checked, and there's a transfer with your name on it. What's happening?"
Not panic, just casual calm.
"Oh, that," David said.
"Yeah, I moved the money. Don't worry, Mom, it's in a better place now. An investment account I set up. You'll thank me later."
Margaret blinked, stunned. "You moved my money? Without asking me?" "Mom," he said, his voice turning smooth, reassuring. "Look, you're not getting any younger. Managing accounts, watching the market, it's complicated. I didn't want you to stress. I'm taking care of it, for your own good." Her throat tightened. "David, that's not your decision to make. That money is mine. It's my retirement, my safety." "Mom, relax," he said, chuckling lightly. "He'll still have it. I'm just handling it smarter. Trust me, you don't need to worry about numbers at this stage in your life. You should be enjoying yourself." Margaret gripped the phone, her knuckles white. "Enjoy myself? With nothing in my account? With no say over my own savings?" "Mom," David sighed, his tone dipping into something sharper. "You're overreacting. I'm trying to protect you. These are complicated times, and honestly, you wouldn't understand all the details. Just let me take care of it." She sat frozen, staring at the dwindled number on her screen. Her security, her independence, gone, replaced by her son's promise. When the call ended, Margaret's tea had gone cold. She sat in silence, her chest heavy, her hands trembling. Her late husband's voice echoed in her memory, Robert, reminding her during those long years of double shifts and penny pinching. "One day this savings will give you freedom, Margaret. A safety net. A way to rest after a lifetime of work." And now, with one quiet transfer, her son had cut that net away. She whispered to herself, voice breaking, "What have you done, David?" That night, Margaret sat alone at the kitchen table, the number in her savings account like a wound she couldn't stop staring at. She closed her eyes, but instead of sleep, memories filled her mind. Robert had been a quiet man,
steady as the seasons. He worked 30 years at the paper mill, his hands rough, his back stooped, but he never once complained. "It's for us, Margaret," he used to say. "Every hour I work now buys us peace later." She herself had taught school, clipping coupons, sewing her own clothes, skipping dinners out so that every extra dollar could slip into their savings. They hadn't traveled, hadn't splurged, hadn't lived large, but they had saved. And when Robert passed, Margaret promised herself she would honor that work. She wouldn't waste what he left behind. That money wasn't just paper or numbers on a screen. It was Robert's calloused hands, her own sleepless nights grading papers, their shared dream of stability in old age. Now it was gone, taken not by accident, not by illness or bad luck, but by the son she had trusted. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A message from David. "Mom, don't worry about the account. Sarah and I are handling everything. Focus on relaxing. Love you." Love you. The words cut deeper than silence. Love wasn't supposed to feel like theft. Margaret typed a reply but erased it before sending. What was the point? If she objected, they would only tell her she was stressed, confused, too old to understand. She pushed the phone aside and stood slowly, the weight of her age pressing down on her joints. She walked to the living room, where Robert's photo rested on the mantel. He smiled at her from behind the glass, his eyes kind, his shoulders broad in the picture from their 40th anniversary. "I tried, Robert," she whispered. "I tried to keep it safe, but they've taken it from me all those years. For nothing." The silence or the passage of time, but because the people she thought would protect her had turned into her greatest vulnerability. The next morning, she forced herself through the motions. Coffee, oatmeal, tidying the house. But every moment was laced with unease. She checked the mailbox twice, as if expecting bills she couldn't pay. She found herself turning lights off during the day to save electricity. She skipped adding fruit to her grocery list, telling herself bread and peanut butter would be enough. It was as though her son hadn't just emptied her account. He'd emptied her sense of security. When Sarah stopped by that afternoon, breezing in with a smile too sweet, Margaret noticed the way her daughter-in-law's eyes flicked over the house, to the pictures on the wall, the furniture, the little details of a life built carefully, preserved faithfully. Sarah's voice was light, casual. "Don't worry, Margaret. We'll make sure you never have to think about money again. Isn't that a relief?" Relief. Margaret forced a smile, but inside, the word twisted like a knife. Relief wasn't what she felt. What she felt was stripped, naked, dependent, and she hated it. That evening, after Sarah left, Margaret sat down with her journal. She hadn't written in it for months, but now her pen moved furiously, scratching across the page. "I gave up vacations. I gave up new dresses. Robert gave up rest. We built our safety with bare hands and weary hearts. And today, it is gone. Not by fate, by choice, their choice. I thought I was safe in the house we made, on the cushion we built. But I see now. Safety is an illusion when others hold the keys." She closed the journal, her eyes wet but her jaw firm. For the first time, Margaret admitted to herself a truth she had been pushing away since the day she saw the empty account. Her savings weren't just stolen. Margaret invited David and Sarah over for lunch. She had set the table carefully: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans. It was the kind of meal she used to make when David was a boy, when family dinners were full of chatter and warmth, but as they sat down, Margaret's appetite was gone. She pushed food around her plate, the weight of the missing savings gnawing at her. Finally, she spoke. "David, I want to talk about my account." He sighed, setting down his fork. "Mom, we already went over this. The money's fine. It's invested." "I never agreed to that," she said, her voice steady but trembling underneath. "That money was supposed to be my security. You had no right to move it." Sarah leaned forward, her tone sharp but dressed in concern. "Margaret, stressing about numbers isn't good for you. You'll just make yourself sick." "I'm not stressed, I'm angry," Margaret replied, her hands tightening in her lap. "It's my savings. I need it back where it belongs." David reached across the table, placing his hand over hers. His smile was gentle, but his words were cutting. "Mom, you're misremembering things. We talked about this months ago. You said you trusted me to handle it. Don't you remember?" Margaret's eyes widened. "No, I would never say that. I never gave you permission." But Sarah was already nodding, her voice calm, condescending. "You did, Margaret. Maybe you've just forgotten. You've had so much on your mind lately." Forgotten, the word echoed in her head. She shook her head. "I haven't forgotten. I know what I said." David sighed, pulling his hand back. "Mom, you're tired. You've been through a lot since Dad passed. It's natural for details to slip. That's why we're stepping in, to protect you." Margaret felt her throat tighten. Protect, that word again. But what chilled her wasn't their insistence. It was the certainty in their voices. They were rewriting her memory in real time, turning her protests into proof of her supposed weakness. After lunch, when they left, Margaret sat alone at the kitchen table, her untouched plate still in front of her. For a moment, she wondered if they were right. Had she somehow agreed? Had grief clouded her mind? She pushed the thought away, but the seed was planted. That night she couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, questions circling like vultures. What if I am forgetting things? What if I am losing track? What if I really can't manage anymore? The next morning, she forced herself to open her journal. She wrote down every detail of the conversation, every word they had said, exactly as she remembered. They say I agreed. I know I didn't. They say I forgot. I know I haven't. I will not let them turn my memory into their weapon. She tore the page from the journal and slipped it into a folder she kept in the drawer of her desk. Then she opened her bank statements and began printing every transaction she could find. She filed those too. If they wanted to make her doubt herself, she would keep proof. Over the next weeks, the pattern continued. Whenever she raised questions about her money, David would sigh. Sarah would smile, and together they would chip away at her certainty. "Mom, you're repeating yourself." "Margaret, we already explained this, don't you remember?" "You're just confused. It happens to everyone your age." Each phrase landed like a blow. But behind her polite nods and quiet silence, Margaret's resolve hardened. She wrote everything down, every word, every date, every dismissal. And with every page she added to her folder, the fear that maybe she was losing her grip faded, replaced by clarity. She wasn't the one forgetting. They were the ones lying. It happened on a Thursday evening, just as the sun slipped below the horizon. Margaret was settling into her recliner with a novel when the house fell into sudden, unnatural silence. The hum of the refrigerator, her knees stiff, and made her way to the window. The street outside glowed with porch lights and lampposts. Neighbors' televisions flickered through living room curtains. It wasn't the neighborhood, it was her house. Her heart pounded as she reached for the flashlight in the drawer, fumbling with shaking hands. She found the unpaid notice taped to her front door minutes later, bold red letters glaring at her. "Service disconnected. Non-payment. Non-payment? She had given David the utility bill 2 weeks ago, just as he'd asked. He'd promised to handle it. "Don't stress, Mom. I'll take care of everything." Now she stood in the dark, humiliated, a chill crawling up her arms. She lit a candle and carried it back inside, its flame wavering in the still air. For hours she sat at the kitchen table, staring at the shadows flickering on the walls. Her mind whirled. So this was what protection looked like. Promises broken, bills unpaid. Sitting alone in a dark house because she wasn't allowed to manage her own money anymore. The fear that had haunted her for weeks shifted. It hardened into something sharper. Anger. When the lights finally came back on the next morning, after she called the utility company herself and paid the bill with the little she still had in her checking account, Margaret picked up her journal. She wrote furiously, the words almost tearing through the page. "They told me to trust them. I did. And now I sit in the dark because of their carelessness. They are not protecting me. They are stripping me. This ends tonight. I will not be silent any longer." That afternoon, when David called to check in, she didn't bother softening her tone. "The lights were cut off yesterday," she said flatly. There was a pause. Then his voice, breezy, dismissive. "Oh, Mom, it must have slipped my mind. Don't worry, it won't happen again. You're overreacting. Everyone misses a bill now and then." "I never did," she cut in. "Not once. Not in 40 years. And now, when I hand everything over to you, I'm sitting in the dark." Silence. For the first time, she didn't hear the steady confidence in his voice. She heard uncertainty. "Mom," he finally muttered, "we're just trying to help." "Help doesn't leave me cold and afraid in my own home," Margaret said. Her voice was calm now, cold as steel. "This was the last time. I am taking my life back." She ended the call before he could reply. Her hands trembled as she set the phone down, but not from fear, from adrenaline, from the rush of finally speaking the truth. That evening, she pulled out the folder from her desk. Bank statements, journal entries, printed emails. Her evidence. She spread the papers across the table, the flicker of determination in her eyes stronger than the candlelight that had kept her company the night before. For weeks she had doubted herself. For weeks she had let their voices drown out her own. But last night in the dark had shown her the truth. They weren't saving her. They were sinking her. And now she would fight back. The following Monday, Margaret put on her navy blue coat, the one Robert used to say made her look dignified, and walked to the bus stop at the end of her street. She hadn't taken public transit in years, not since she had her car, but her hands trembled less with each step. She wasn't going to tell David or Sarah where she was going. This was her mission. The bus carried her downtown, the familiar streets rolling by. She stepped off in front of the brick building that housed First National Bank, the same bank she and Robert had trusted for decades. Inside, the air was cool, the smell of paper and polish heavy. She approached the counter. "May I speak to Mr. Lanning?" she asked, her voice. Lanning had been her banker for years. He knew her name, her late husband, even the way she liked to double-check every line before signing. "What can I do for you, Mrs. Hayes?" he asked gently. Margaret leaned forward, lowering her voice. "I need to know what's been happening with my accounts. Every transfer, every withdrawal, especially the ones with my son's name on them." His brows lifted, but he nodded. "Of course. Let me pull those records." As the printer hummed and sheets stacked up,
Margaret's stomach clenched. When Mr. Lanning slid the papers toward her, her eyes devoured the numbers. There it was. The massive transfer to an account under David's management. Other smaller withdrawals, too. Patterns she hadn't noticed before. Her hands tightened around the papers. Did he have the right to do this? Mr. Lanning hesitated. Legally, yes. With the power of attorney you signed 2 years ago, he can move funds on your behalf. Margaret blinked. Power of attorney? I didn't sign that. Mr. Lanning adjusted his glasses. I'm afraid you did. I was present. David explained it was to make things easier if you were ever ill. You signed the forms here in this office. Her stomach turned. A dim memory flickered. David bringing her here, talking quickly, papers sliding across the desk. He had said it was routine paperwork to streamline her pension. She hadn't understood every word, but she had trusted him. She closed her eyes. I thought it was something else. I didn't realize I was giving away control of my life. Mr. Lanning's voice softened. Mrs. Hayes, it happens more often than you'd think. But you still have rights. That document can be revoked, especially if you're capable of managing your own finances. She straightened. I am capable. And for the first time in months, she believed it. Mr. Lanning helped her make copies of every
On the bus ride home, she clutched the folder tight against her chest. Her heart was pounding, but not from fear, from purpose. That night, she opened her journal and wrote, They think I am powerless, but today, I walked into the bank myself. I held the truth in my hands. Every dollar they moved without my permission is proof. I may have signed their paper, but I did not sign away my soul. I am not done. Not yet. She tucked the journal into the folder, locking it in her desk drawer. From that day forward, Margaret lived a double life. To David and Sarah, she was the compliant mother, nodding politely when they reassured her, letting them think their gaslighting was working. But in private, she was documenting, saving, gathering. Every bill she paid herself, she kept the receipt. Every call to the utility company, she wrote the time and the name of the agent. Every conversation with David and Sarah, she scribbled down their words the moment they left. Her folder swelled, each page a quiet act of rebellion. They thought they had silenced her, but Margaret Hayes was writing her way back to freedom. The folder was growing heavier by the week, and Margaret knew she couldn't do this alone. She needed someone who understood the language of law, someone she could trust. Her mind kept drifting to Helen Parker. Helen had been her closest friend back when they both taught at Willow Creek High. Margaret had taught English. Helen had run the business department. After retirement, Helen had spent a few years working as a paralegal for a local attorney before fully stepping back. They hadn't spoken in months, but friendship, Margaret knew, didn't fade with silence. That Friday, she picked up the phone and dialed Helen's number. Margaret Hayes! Helen's voice came warm and surprised on the other end. It's been too long. Margaret swallowed, her throat tight. Helen, I need your help. Within the hour, Helen was at her kitchen table, her reading glasses perched on her nose as Margaret spread out the folder. Bank statements, journal entries, notices, copies of transactions. Helen flipped through the stack with sharp eyes, her lips pressed thin. Good Lord, Margaret, they've been bleeding you dry. Margaret's hands trembled. I thought I was losing my mind. They kept telling me I'd agreed to it, that I'd forgotten, but I know I didn't. Helen reached across the table, squeezing her hand. You didn't forget. They manipulated you. I've seen this before. Children taking advantage of aging parents. But Margaret, you are not helpless. You're sharper than most people half your age. Tears stung Margaret's eyes at the words she hadn't realized she was desperate to hear. Helen continued, flipping another page. This power of attorney, yes, you signed it, but it can be revoked. You're competent, you're clear-headed, and you've documented everything. That makes all the difference. Margaret leaned forward. So what do I do? You fight. Helen said simply. We'll prepare the paperwork to revoke the power of attorney. You'll regain full control of your accounts, and if they contest it, we'll be ready. You have evidence, Margaret, strong evidence. For the first time in weeks, Margaret felt something like hope. Over the next few days, Helen became her confidant, her ally. They met every afternoon, sometimes in Margaret's kitchen, sometimes at Helen's dining room table. Papers spread around them like armor. Helen helped her organize the documents, highlighting key transactions, attaching Margaret's journal entries as supporting notes. She explained each legal step, slowly, carefully, never once speaking down to her. You're not crazy, Helen reminded her again and again. They're gaslighting you. That's what abusers do. They twist reality until you doubt yourself. But you've got the truth written in black and white. One afternoon as they worked, Margaret's hand shook while holding a particularly large withdrawal slip. This was Robert's pension, she whispered. Every cent he earned with his back breaking at the mill. They moved it as if it were pocket change. Helen's eyes softened. And now you're going to take it back. For Robert, for yourself. Margaret wiped her eyes and nodded. By the end of the week, the revocation papers were ready. Helen walked her through them line by line, making sure she understood every word. Margaret signed with a steady hand. When it was done, Helen looked at her and smiled. You've just taken the first step toward freedom. That night, Margaret opened her journal. Today I did not sit in the dark. I did not tremble at their voices. Today, I signed my name not as a victim, but as a fighter. Helen stood beside me, steady and sure. With her help, I will not be silenced. With her help, I will reclaim what Robert and I built. She closed the book and set it on the nightstand. For the first time in months, she slept deeply, the kind of sleep that comes when fear begins to loosen its grip. She was no longer alone. And soon, David and Sarah would learn that the mother they thought they could control still had fight left in her. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and polished brass. Margaret sat at the long oak table beside Helen and a young attorney Helen had recommended, a steady man named Mr. Torres. Her folder, now thick with documents and notes, rested in front of her like a shield. Across the aisle sat David and Sarah. David avoided her eyes, flipping through papers with quick, nervous hands. Sarah, by contrast, sat tall and composed, her lips pursed in a thin smile. When the judge entered, everyone stood. Margaret's knees wobbled, but she held her spine straight. The hearing,
Hayes has demonstrated repeated forgetfulness, the lawyer intoned. She has misplaced bills, forgotten conversations, and expressed paranoia about her own family. My client has only ever acted in her best interest, ensuring her finances are handled responsibly. Margaret's hands tightened in her lap. Lies. Each word another twist of the knife. When it was Sarah's turn to speak, she leaned forward, her voice sweet. We love Margaret. We've only ever wanted to protect her. She worries herself sick over money. We just wanted to give her peace. Peace. The word burned in Margaret's chest. Finally, it was her turn. Mr. Torres rose. Your Honor, Mrs. Hayes is not here because she's incapable. She's here because her autonomy has been stolen. We will show evidence of financial transfers conducted without her informed consent, bills neglected under her son's management, and a clear pattern of gaslighting intended to undermine her confidence. He gestured for Margaret. She stood slowly, her hands gripping the edge of the table. The courtroom blurred for a moment.
but when she opened her folder, her vision sharpened. "I may be 74, she said, her voice trembling at first, then steadying, "but I am not incompetent. I taught high school English for 35 years. I paid every bill in this household without fail until my son insisted on taking over. And since then, my savings have been drained. My lights have gone out. And I've been told over and over that I am forgetful, that I agreed to things I never did." She lifted a stack of papers. "Here are my journals, my notes from every conversation. Here are my bank statements with David's name on every transfer. Here are receipts from bills I had to call and pay myself after they were neglected." The judge leaned forward, scanning the pages as Mr. Torres handed them up. Margaret's voice grew stronger. "I may be old. I may forget where I left my glasses sometimes, but I do not forget the difference between love and control. My children have confused the two, and I will not let them rewrite my life as if I were already gone." Silence fell over the courtroom. Helen reached for her hand, squeezing gently. The judge finally spoke. "Mr. Hayes, Mrs. Hayes's records are detailed and thorough. The evidence indicates she is fully capable of managing her own finances. The power of attorney is hereby revoked." The gavel struck once, sharp and final. Margaret exhaled, the sound half sob, half laugh. Relief flooded her chest. David's face reddened, his jaw tight. Sarah whispered something sharp in his ear, but Margaret didn't bother to listen. As the courtroom emptied, Helen leaned close. "You did it, Margaret. You stood up to them, and you won." Margaret wiped her eyes, smiling through the tears. "For Robert, for myself." She looked down at the folder, now lighter somehow. It wasn't just paper anymore. It was proof that her voice still mattered, and she would never let anyone silence it again. The morning after the hearing, Margaret woke with sunlight streaming across her quilt. For the first time in months, the weight in her chest was gone. No dread about what David might be moving behind her back. No fear that Sarah's voice would twist her into silence. Just peace. She brewed her coffee and sat at the table with her journal. Flipping to a fresh page, she wrote slowly, carefully. "Yesterday, the court gave me back what was always mine. My freedom. They tried to take my future and call it love. But I am not finished. My life is still mine to live." That afternoon, she went back to the bank. Mr. Lanning greeted her with a warm smile. Together they moved her money into new accounts. Accounts David would never touch. She added a trusted neighbor as an emergency contact, someone. Margaret began to live again. She joined a book club at the library, her laugh mixing with the chatter of women she hadn't spoken to in years. She started volunteering at the church food pantry, her hands busy with bags of rice and boxes of pasta, her heart lightened by purpose. She even booked a trip, something she and Robert had always dreamed of but never managed to take. A bus tour through New England in the fall, when the leaves would be at their brightest. The first time she told Helen, her friend grinned wide. "Margaret Hayes on the open road. Now that's a picture I like." One Saturday, as she packed a small suitcase for a weekend trip, her phone buzzed. David's name lit up the screen. She let it ring until it went silent. He called again the next day. Again, she didn't answer. On the third day, he sent a message. "Mom, we were only trying to help. Can we talk?" Margaret stared at the words for a long moment. Once, those words would have pulled her back, made her question herself, made her bend. Now she simply turned off the phone. Not out of spite, not out of hate, but because she had finally learned that her peace no longer depended on their approval. That evening she drove to the coast. The highway stretched out before her, the sun sinking low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and gold. She rolled down the window, letting the wind whip through her hair. At a scenic overlook, she pulled over and stepped out. The ocean roared below, vast and endless. She breathed deeply, the salty air filling her lungs, the sound of waves echoing in her ears. For years she had lived cautiously, saving every penny, deferring every joy for later. Then she had lived under her children's shadow, shrinking smaller with each passing week. But now, later had finally come. She smiled, whispering into the freedom is not just numbers in an account. It is the right to choose how to spend your days, your money, your heart. They saw my savings as theirs to consume, but I see them as years of sacrifice, and now as years of possibility. The road ahead is mine. She closed the book and set it on the nightstand, her heart steady. The house was quiet. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of safety. Margaret Hayes turned off the lamp, the moonlight spilling across her quilt, and drifted into sleep, free, independent, and at peace.